Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface, and the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Kulveer Ranger. Thank you both so much for joining us this Friday. Let's take a look and see what is on the front of some of those front pages. The Mail reports that though Monday's loosening of COVID restrictions is due to go ahead, the spread of the Indian variant could mean the final relaxation on June the 21st is delayed. That's also on the front of the Telegraph, which says Boris Johnson has warned the Indian variant could seriously disrupt the plans in June. The Sun describes the prospect of a postponement as squeaky bug time. The Times keeps it simple: lockdown easing at risk. It's the Mirror's big splash as well: threat to Freedom Day. Also on the front of The Guardian, which reports on the escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian violence. The Express goes with an interview with the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, who says Britain can look forward to a brighter future as the economy bounces back after the pandemic. The FT leads with the announcement of an investigation by the Serious Fraud Office into the metals businesses owned by Sanjeev Gupta. And The Star relays an apparent misunderstanding between itself and the Russian government. Well, as I was saying, we're joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Kulveer Ranger. And it does really dominate all the front pages, doesn't it? The Boris Johnson press conference this evening and the fact that possibly this end of June relaxing of all the regulations may not be happening. Kulveer, do you think, given this new variant, are we reopening too soon?
No, look, I think this is why the government had set out such a elongated plan. You know, when we all saw it months back, we thought, well, they're building in a bit of fat there. They've gone ultra cautious. They've learned the lessons from last year of going too soon or being too impatient. But what it looks like is that 4-week step in between has been quite rightly there to account for any changes. There's always been a case of, now we're well aware that variants will emerge. You know, we had the emergence of the Kent one that sort of kiboshed Christmas, but then there was a South African variant that we were all extremely worried about because the scientists and the medical people were saying that could be quite wouldn't be affected by the vaccines. And now the Indian variant. I think the issue here is that whether we get back to freedom is always going to be a question anyway. Was June the 21st, which we seem to be going ahead on Monday in terms of step 3, but step 4 on June the 21st, no more social distancing, going back to an inverted commas normal. The way we're being programmed, and even I know my wife said to me today, I'm not so sure I'm overly keen to get rid of social distancing in June. I think it's going to take people a bit longer anyway, just because we say we're going into some sort of freedom. Is that really going to be the case that people will adopt it? So freedom, 21st of June, I think we've got a bit of time to see how the Indian variant plays out. I think the medical people and the scientists are quite rightly telling us to be cautious. The government has time to see the data as it emerges. But I think actual normality won't be about June the 21st. It'll be how long it takes us to live with the virus in the background of our lives.
Yeah. And Susie, I mean, do you feel a little bit like that? I mean, I know I certainly felt as soon as there were any lifting, really quite excited. But now I sort of think, oh, well, you know, next Monday things are going to change. You know, at the end of June things will change a bit more. It's not really in the calendar as a massive highlight anymore. I mean, are you really marking off the days until you can go indoors in a pub?
Not really. It's sort of a combination of excited and cautious at the same time. But what you've got here is we need to just remember that this is not a Britain-only issue. You know, we want to release on May the 17th or June the 21st, or what's Boris Johnson going to say? This is a pandemic. It's global. At the end of this year, there may be 1 billion people worldwide who are vaccinated, mainly in the richest parts of the world. That leaves 6 billion people entirely unvaccinated. And that is a huge reservoir for the disease to circulate, for new strains to arise, and then to arrive in those countries that have been vaccinated, potentially with the ability to escape some of the vaccines. And the issue with the Indian variant is firstly that because it's more transmissible, that may mean, according to members of SAGE that are published today, it may mean 10 to 20,000 hospital admissions a day, they reckon. And at the height of the pandemic, it was only just over 3,000. So that would be really seriously bad. Even though many of us are vaccinated, there are those who can't and those who haven't been vaccinated. And they mean that there's enough of them that there could be serious problems with hospital admissions. And the other issue is, I agree with what Kulveer said. I was happy when the new sort of roadmap was produced that it looked like the Prime Minister and the government had learned from their mistakes last year. And I was relieved that they were so much more sensible with the way they were doing it. And of course, it may still work out, hopefully. But what's been hugely disappointing is the 2 weeks it took to close the borders to Indian travellers or travellers from India. Even though Pakistan and Bangladesh had roughly the same rates of illness as India, and they closed travel from those countries on April the 9th, it wasn't done for India until April the 23rd. That's 14 days in which the borders were left open. Again, how many times has that got to happen for those running the country to realise that closing them too late is too late? We've also got an issue with self-isolation payments being so incredibly low because Rishi Sunak refuses to raise them, and they mean that only about 11% of people properly isolate. And despite what the Prime Minister said today about very tough quarantine rules being in place, those quarantine rules are so not tough that if you have travelled from a red list country and you are asked to quarantine, you have to. No one else in your household has to. They can all skip down the road and happily infect other people. And there's nothing to stop that happening, even if they can enforce the quarantine, which of course they're not doing a lot of the time. So we've got a huge number of issues in actually controlling the infection rate. And it seems that there are still, unfortunately, some ways in which we haven't learned the lessons. It's about time we did.
Put this to Kulveer. I mean, do you think that's a fair point, that there was so much criticism of the government at the very beginning, wasn't there, that they hadn't acted quickly enough on the advice given? I mean, do you think that it was an error not to restrict travel a great deal faster to places like India?
I think there's a lot that the government's trying to grapple with about the international element. And I completely agree with Susie about, let's not forget that first word, global pandemic. And so far, a lot of the emphasis has been on nation states dealing with it internally. And you can become a bit inward looking in terms of saying, well, we've got it under control. We've got thankfully, the death rates down, the infection rate down. Therefore, we're all right. And people's behavior starts to become a bit more relaxed as well. But it is a global issue, and that transmission from country to country. And that's where now all countries need to work together about how they're going to manage the data, the awareness, the rules, regulations, and there's going to be probably a lot more collaboration at an international level to manage when we see spreads and real surges happening in different parts of the world. So I think there's another stage of this as we go forward, because I've been saying last year was year zero of this pandemic. This year is probably where the first world gets to vaccinate itself. But then we've got, the other parts of the world, the poorer parts of the world, the third world, with the African continent, which we don't talk about that much about what's been going on there in terms of COVID. And as we've seen what's been happening in India and South America as well, these countries and these areas will take much longer to get to the stage of vaccination and managing COVID. So there's plenty of time to go in how we need to manage this. And we will not, as a country, be out of this unless all of these countries are in a safer place. And then I think that's where the governments have to work together in terms of being agile in dealing with transmission internationally.
And briefly, Susie, it is a balance, isn't it, for the government? Because these restaurants, these bars, they've held on for as long as they can. Yes, many of them have managed to have outdoor spaces, but a lot of the ones that are indoor only have not been able to trade at all for over a year. And the Prime Minister's trying to juggle, isn't he? He wants the country to be safe, but equally there are many businesses who are saying if we don't open up very soon, we are going to go under.
Yeah, and many that already have. And there were ways around this which were being looked at the start of the pandemic, including some stimulus payments to every individual, something like a very temporary universal basic income, which might have got us over some of these issues and would have probably worked out cheaper than giving billions of pounds to businesses who then paid it out in share dividends to their shareholders. So there are other things that could have been done, but this is where we are now. This is what we're looking forward to. And like Kulveer says, this is just the start of what's going to be happening. And unfortunately, we still seem to be relying to some extent on the Sun on page 4. They're saying we are going to reopen still on May the 17th, but we want people in the areas of high infection to think twice, quote unquote, about going out to the pub. While at the same time, the Sun's reporting huge preparations to sell huge amounts of beer and so on and so forth. Businesses want to sell and they want to reopen and people want to try to get back to some kind of normal. But relying on people to use their common sense has probably helped a lot of us over the past year, but it hasn't stopped 2 waves of the virus. So saying we're going to reopen, but, everyone just be a bit cautious, it's not going to work. There's got to be something more definitive than that going on.
OK, Susie and Kulveer, thanks very much for now. We've got a short break, but coming up, could we be any more excited to tell you about the Friends reunion? Join us after the break. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Susie Boniface and Kulveer Ranger. And Susie, you've picked out for us a story in The Sun, Angela Rayner. She's saying that she might have voted for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, what she's actually doing, although it's kind of is presented as, I might have voted for him last week, guys. What she's actually done is talk about when she was 18 years old and a young single parent, she might well have voted for the politician who promised to be, as in her words, a bit spicy. And throw in a hand grenade and shake things up a bit. But this is kind of part of the Labour strategy, I think, of trying to show they understand why people voted for Boris Johnson. And it will move on at some point to saying, that was a daft idea, wasn't it, guys?
But does it diminish Keir Starmer?
It makes him look, it references the fact that he's not spicy, that he's a bit more maybe bland, a bit more semolina. I don't know. I haven't thought of what kind of food stuff Keir Starmer might be like, but I don't think it's spicy.
OK, we can certainly think about that over the next half hour or so. Kulveer, you've chosen the possible return, well, it is coming back, of Friends inside the Daily Express. Friends reunited. Does the world need a Friends reunion?
Well, I don't know, but, it's a date, it appears, that won't be moved by COVID. So May the 27th is when there's going to be some fresh new episodes of Friends. And those of us who are a certain generation, couldn't escape Friends when it seems like much longer, but it was 17 years ago that the last episode aired. But it was with us, so those of us, as I say, of a certain age, in our teens and 20s. And it almost feels like it never went away. It's always been on some channel somewhere. So it's gathered further fans in the intervening years. And now all these slightly more older and mature stars. And I'm going to credit Susie with this joke. I think she said this episode should be the one with the Botox.
Yes, because none of them
great
look...
one, Susie.
Well done, Susie. Yeah. None of them look, a week older, do they?
No.
Isn't that a miracle?
No, the last one had 52 million viewers in the States when they finished the last series. So there's obviously still probably a huge fan base and plenty of advertising money to be made from coming back. But I think, look, we all need a bit of cheer, a bit of normality. Yeah. So is this a bit of normality coming back to us? Maybe it's a good thing, and I'll probably tune in. OK.
Well, thanks so much for bringing us your choices this half hour. We'll get a lot more from you at 11:30. Susie Boniface and Kulveer Ranger, thank you both very much. Just to say that if you missed any of the press preview tonight, it is available shortly and every night on our YouTube channel.